So why are we updating our climate action plan? Our original climate action plan was adopted in 2012, and the City Council identified preparation of an updated plan as a priority in their work plan. Since our original CAP was adopted, a multitude of strategies to monitor and address climate change have emerged at the international, federal, and state level. And the state of California has actually adopted many of these strategies through legislation. Some of them are voluntary measures, others are mandatory. So examples are the Title 24 Cal Green standards for building construction and the Pavley Clean Car standards for vehicle emissions. And then they also have established GHG emission reduction targets for the state. So building off of our 2012 CAP, the city's hope for our new CAP, we're calling it the CAP 2.0, is to create a clear strategy forward to respond to these new regulations and technologies, and then to protect the health and well-being of residents and the local economy. So the process to date, the Committee on Energy and the Environment is the main city body reviewing the documents and advising staff through the process. We've had a little bit of a delay because of COVID. So the project kicked off right when the lockdown happened. So we've been steadily meeting since August of 2020. And then we've had a couple of city council touch points through the project, and ultimately the council will review the final plan. And so right now we're doing a big outreach push, including connecting with other committees and commissions. We'll be coming to the Planning Commission on March 24th. So I'll see some of you there and other stakeholders and the community. So the first step in really looking at the CAP is looking at the existing conditions and what's already in place. So we looked at other relevant plans and programs and policies that currently dictate our activities relating to the climate. We looked at our first climate action plan, and we looked at, have we implemented those actions? Are there still actions outstanding from that plan? And then we did a climate vulnerability assessment where we really looked at the science behind climate change and climate scenarios and the impacts that we would see locally here. So warmer temperatures, drought, wildfires, things like that. And then this is really dense. I'm not going to read through all of this, but the next step was really to look at the emissions reduction targets that we should aim for here in Pleasanton. So I'll quickly go through these, but like I mentioned, we can circle back if you want me to get into the details. But really the first step was looking at what are the state regulations in place? What's the regulatory context that we're looking at here? And then the next step was to look at our greenhouse gas inventory for the city. So this slide shows a breakdown of our most recent inventory, which was in 2017. And in sum, our biggest emission sector is really on-road transportation. It accounts for about 56% of all of our emissions here in town. The next biggest category would be buildings and energy. You can see water, wastewater, waste are pretty low comparatively. So then the next step was to take that inventory and look at, did we meet our goals from our first climate action plan? And the answer is yes, we did. We met our goals and we actually met them ahead of target. The target was to have a 15% decrease by 2020. And that red dashed line on the screen shows that. So you can see we hit it ahead of target there. And then after that, we looked at forecasting our emissions out. There's lots of different models that we use and inputs that went into this, but what are our emissions going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road? And we did that for both a business as usual scenario, assuming we kind of live in a vacuum and there's no external forces. And then we did that assuming that, we don't live in a vacuum and there are other regulations at the state and federal level that will change our emissions here, assuming we do nothing. And so that's the adjusted forecast. There are certain regulations that will both increase and decrease our emissions. So we have to account for those. And then the last step is really determining what should our reduction targets be. So the two green dots are showing the two targets that the council adopted for us. They affirmed a short and a long-term target to define our emissions reduction pathway here. So this diagram is showing the orange on the top is basically everything that already exists that we're not going to worry about here because it's already being handled at the state and federal level, and it's going to bring our emissions down to this light orange line. And then the green is everything that we're going to do locally to get us to those targets. So what local actions do we need to take? And that's really what the CAP is going to try to address, is what locally can we do to bring our number down to the target. I wanted to point out that the direction that the council had affirmed in terms of our emissions reduction targets aligns with Dublin's recent plan and is also the draft target in Livermore's plan. They're at a similar stage in the process that we are. So aligning with these other Tri-Valley cities really could lead to greater regional collaboration in achieving our goals. So the policies and actions that will ultimately get included in the CAP will be implemented over the next 10 to 25 years. It's not all happening today, it's happening over the course of the plan. And as part of this process, we're going to put in place an implementation and monitoring plan to help determine that phasing through the life of the plan. And the council will aim to really have a balanced approach between implementing these policies over the next 10 plus years, along with the other priorities we have in town. And then the goal of the policies will really be to aim for that 2030 target. 2045, it's so far out in the future. It's really an aspirational target, but the reality is that legislation will change, technology will change, and between now and then, we're going to have to reevaluate.
Hey, Megan, are you changing the slide, or is it just mine that's not moving?
I'll move it for you.
Oh, there. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So the next step after we set our target was to really look at the framework of what the rest of the document is going to look like. So this was really crucial in identifying priorities beyond just greenhouse gas emissions. So clean water, public health, jobs, and then helping to prioritize which actions will actually get included in the plan. So the City Council affirmed a vision for the plan, which I can read this. This Climate Action Plan 2.0 looks to not only reduce Pleasanton's greenhouse gas emissions, but also improve quality of life and public health, cultivate community resilience and adaptability, and promote thriving ecosystems and a vibrant economy now and for future generations. Through an inclusive and equitable process, the CAP 2.0 will position Pleasanton as a regional leader addressing climate change. And then as part of the framework, we looked at guiding principles. So these are really the initial parameters that all of the actions that are included in the plan need to meet. So they need to be evidence-based, they need to be actionable, and they need to be accountable. And then they identified some co-benefits. So these are other priorities that may be associated with the actions that might elevate an action to get included into the plan or not. And those include improved habitats and ecosystems, improved public health, increased resiliency, advanced equity, job creation, cost savings, and improved mobility and transportation safety. And then the last piece of the framework was determining some criteria that we could sort of weight these actions against each other. So effectiveness, how much is it going to reduce our emissions, cost, and that's both to the city and to the community, feasibility, support, co-benefits, and equity. And that kind of leads us to where we're at now, which is with a really long list of potential actions that are being considered for inclusion in the plan. The list is really putting everything on the table, looking at everything that we could do, and then determining what actually gets included. So the list was developed by looking at our existing climate action plan, looking at best practices and actions from neighboring jurisdictions, getting input from the public, the committee, and city staff, and then discussion at a variety of different focus groups that we had that included stakeholders and implementation partners. So our focus group for the business sector included a few people that are on this call, but we had representation from Hacienda, Bay East Realtors, PDA, Workday, Hines, Go Green, and the Chamber. So to prioritize this long list of actions that I mentioned we have, our consultant team put together this multi-criteria analysis where they scored each of the actions based on those criteria that I mentioned. So the effectiveness, cost, feasibility, support, equity, and co-benefits. And it is qualitative, but it's based on their experience, available literature, peer city case studies, and outreach that we've done to date. So it really just aims to prioritize which actions we should actually consider and bring on to the next step of the project. And it the aim is to narrow it to a realistic and achievable quantity of really highly impactful actions that can be implementable, as I mentioned, over the life of the plan. So the prioritized list of actions will be included in that link that I send you at the end of this meeting, and you can look through all of them. It includes the whole list, so you can look through everything that we're considering, but the high priority actions are really those actions which we're recommending get moved forward to the next step, and the low priority actions are recommended to be removed from consideration at this time. So the next step will be to go through a quantitative analysis and really look at projected costs and emissions reductions, and that cost benefit analysis will help determine the final list that gets included in the plan. So the proposed actions in the plan, they're separated into a variety of sectors. As seen on the screen, we have buildings and energy, transportation and land use, materials and consumption, natural systems, water resources, and community resilience and well-being. And then in each sector, there's an overarching goal, a strategy, which really identifies how to achieve that goal, and then actions within each strategy. So I'll give you an example. This is transportation and land use. The goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and enhance mobility. And then the three strategies are advanced vehicle decarbonization, advanced active, shared, and public transportation, and advanced sustainable land use. And then there's actions within each of those strategies. So as you undertake your review of the potential actions we're considering, we identified about 10 key actions to focus on that we thought would be of the greatest interest to the business community. So as I mentioned, you don't need to review all 200 of the potential actions on the table, or even all 50 high priority actions proposed to move on to the quantitative analysis, although you're more than welcome to. But we did try to identify a few that we thought would be, of the greatest interest to your group. This is the list, and I don't expect you to read this on the screen. I know it's a lot of text. I just wanted to bring the list up quickly to show you that we have pulled out a few of them. And as you look through these actions, I just want you to keep in mind that in a lot of cases, there are a series of steps involved before they would actually go into effect, including further research, refinement, and outreach. So for example, the top action there, which is an all-electric reach code for new construction. So reach codes, they essentially reach beyond the state minimum requirements for energy use in building, design, and construction. But reach codes, they need to be cost effective. So we would need to actually do an analysis about what would be cost effective here in Pleasanton. And that all changes based on whatever climate zone you're in. And it's due to the cost of energy, temperature, climate, and other factors about your location. So we would need to evaluate that. We would need to decide what types of building the reach codes should apply to, and then what exceptions would be built into them. So for example, biotech and certain research and development businesses, they need natural gas to conduct their business, so they might be exempt from a future reach code that we were to adopt. So just keep that in mind as you're reviewing these, that a lot of these will require some additional refinement. It's not necessarily just adopting what's written on the screen there. And then as you undertake your review, we have a few questions that we're posing to you, which is, should any of our high priority actions be removed from the list so they're not feasible, they're already happening, or they just don't make sense for the community? Should any low priority actions be elevated to high priority and included in that quantitative analysis? So if you are looking through it and you see some things that you think really would work well for the city, we can always elevate that and include it in the quantitative analysis. Are any crucial actions missing? Are there gaps that we should fill? And then do you have any strong support or opposition to the actions listed? So the next steps, really we're going to take this feedback. And so as I mentioned, I'll stop here for a second, but as I mentioned, I'm going to send the memo at the end with all the details in it for you to dig into. You can send me feedback at any time. But ideally, I can get some feedback by the end of the month, if possible, because I'll take all of this feedback from this and the other outreach that we're doing, and I'll bring it back to the committee, and they'll take all of that and ultimately make a recommendation of which actions to move forward. So So we'll take all of this outreach that we're doing, report back to the committee. They'll indicate which actions to move forward. And then the quantitative analysis will be provided to City Council in June, around June time. And then a final list of actions will be selected and a draft cap will be put together and circulated in late summer. So ultimately, the City Council will then review and act on the CAP 2.0 with an anticipated date of fall of this year. So there's lots of opportunities for more feedback as we continue the process. This is just kind of one of those first checkpoints where we're looking for feedback, but there's a lot more opportunities beyond just this month in this meeting. I also wanted to point out that we're holding a community workshop on March 25th at 5:30 p.m. and I can send a link to that here at the end as well. It'd be another great place to continue the conversation. And so if you all want to join us there, we'd love to have you if you're available. And then lastly, to stay involved in the project and virtually engage, you can sign up on our project website for updates. We have lots of information. We have videos, places to provide feedback, trivia, a lot of dense reading material. So check that out if you haven't already. And I will send all of these links in the chat as soon as I stop sharing my screen. So I will stop my share for now. As you saw, there's a lot of other city staff on the call. So you might hear from any of us through this discussion and, answering questions, but I will stop for now.
So Megan, thank you. Just FYI, the chat for some reason is not enabled. I think it's left over from yesterday's event. So I apologize. So we'll just have to raise our hand and ask questions. So
yeah, and maybe I can send a follow-up email that has all these links. So the registration link for the workshop.
Yes. Yeah.
We can send the memo with the more details and the website. So I can get all of that to you in an email at the end.
Yeah, great. And I'll forward it out to everybody. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Herb, I think Dave.
You want me to? I'll watch the hands. Hey, Megan, while we go through that, can you put up that slide that showed the ones you said were focused on business? Definitely. And then I'll watch for hands, and then we could go. Dave had a question.
Good morning, Megan. Fantastic presentation. If you knew nothing about the CAP process, I think your presentations, I've been through a lot of these over the years, and that was a really good summary. That said, there's a few of us in this meeting that went through the first CAP process, so we're already very familiar with the context. Could you email those list of measures to us right now? Because I think that's what we really want to dig into. I know that there are several other stakeholders that have requested the actual list of measures, and it's unfortunate the chat thing isn't working. And then just a procedural question. So you're going to the PC on the 25th, and then you've got a community workshop the following day. So I'm just kind of curious as to how that's going to work. You're proposing some policy, and then you're going to go to the community after that. It seems a little backwards, but I'm sure there's folk that are a lot smarter than me that where that kind of makes sense. So number one, could you please email those measures now if that's possible, or maybe somebody else from your team could email those measures?
Yeah, let me, I'll answer your question and then I'll hop on the email and get that list over to you. So so the Committee on Energy and the Environment is in our main body that we're reviewing this project through the process. So what we're doing in March is we're trying to reach out to all of the other, relevant committees and commissions and stakeholders that might have comments or have really intimate, familiarity with some of the policies that we're talking about. So we're going to the Bike Ped Commission, we're going to Economic Vitality, we're going to Planning Commission, we're going to the Youth Commission, we're going to a variety of groups. And then we also are having that community workshop. So the Planning Commission is on, I think, a Wednesday, it's on the 24th, and then the community workshop is on a Thursday, the 25th. And then we're taking all of the feedback from all of these meetings and reporting it back to the Committee on Energy and the Environment in April. So we're going to have a month to distill sort of everything that we heard.
So the PC meeting isn't a policy making meeting. It's a show like this.
Basically a review. We're trying to get their feedback. We have a different set of policies that we're showing them. Everyone's getting the complete list, but we're trying to focus groups on the policies we think are most relevant to their purview. So for planning commission, it's obviously a lot of land use and transportation,
Sure. Okay.
you know, things,
Gotcha.
things
Okay.
that,
Thank you.
you know, really development projects. So
Yeah, makes
Let me
sense. Yeah, and I know that I tasked you with like 5 different things instantly like that. So my
No worries.
apologies. But yeah,
And
if you could send over the list of policies as ASAP, that'd be great.
I will. And thanks
And
for
thank
being
you
involved in
also
the
for
process,
making
by
time
the
to
way.
meet with this group as well. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you for coming to our focus group and being involved so far in the process. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Megan. And yeah, it's a workshop. I think all these are workshops that you're going through until it gets to city council, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. And I saw Arnie had his hand up.
Thank you, Herb. I've got a couple of questions. Based on where we are politically right now in Pleasanton, my concern with this is that ultimately when this goes to the city council, it would include a section that clearly outlines the business community input and any concerns that the business community has. And those would probably percolate up from the chamber, from the Economic Vitality Committee. But I think it's really important that our present council know exclusively how the business community views this. Beyond that, I think it's good that your committee includes members of the business community, but I really think it's important that their view make it all the way to the council. And then one further question, what do we mean by equity?
Sure. In the context of the climate action plan, it's really making sure that the actions are, you know, fair or equitable across. So for example, if we have an action that focuses on youth, perhaps we have an action that then also focuses on seniors, and there's some sort of balance, and that could be age, that could be race, that could be access. So it's just looking at the policies on balance and making sure that there is some level of equity across them.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any more questions? Okay, Dave again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So Megan, on that equity tip, does that include economic equity as well? So say, for instance, you've got a policy that requires someone to spend some money, and if you're a wealthy Pleasanton resident and it's no big deal versus maybe you're not so well off, is that part of the lens that you're looking through, or is it more on, like, say for instance, more demographic criteria like you alluded to, the age continuum?
Yeah, I think it's all included. If, for example, if we were to have some sort of financial incentive, there might be some financial incentive that's available to certain groups. Although we haven't gotten quite that far into the writing of the specifics of the action, but I think that would be included in the equity lens. Okay, so there's incentives, but then there's also burden. So if you've got a measure that isn't really engineered to have an incentive provided, versus there's a burden to implementing that measure, hopefully that would be included in the calculus as well. Yeah, there can be exceptions and things built into some of the measures to account for that as well.
And maybe I could add, there's also going to be, as Megan mentioned, a quantified sort of cost benefit analysis done in the next round to sort of look at the actual costs of the various measures that are in there, and that will include costs to the city as an organization, but also to the community and to individuals as well.
Great, Peter.
Okay, Megan, are there deadlines by which we have to have this done, or otherwise, you know, bad things will happen to Pleasanton? What's the constraints that you're working under?
Sure. my hope is to have feedback on this initial list by the end of the month. And, you know, if you don't get to it, then there's other opportunities. You know, we'll have the quantitative analysis. You'll have a chance to see the even shorter list, and then you'll have a chance to see the draft plan. So there's lots of opportunities to provide input, but I would like some initial input if you have it. You know, if you're super supportive or super opposed to any of the actions at this stage, I think that would be important for us to know from the business community and where you stand. So by the end of the month would be.
No, I'm talking about state deadlines, state mandates. What?
Well, our current climate action plan's horizon year was 2020. So we do currently need to get our climate action plan adopted, but there aren't necessarily state repercussions for not having one in effect right now, unless a project were to try to streamline off of our climate action plan for CEQA purposes and say, well, the city has a climate action plan, so I don't need to do X, Y, and Z mitigation. So as long as current development applications are not doing that, then we should be okay with our current timeline for adoption.
Peter, if I can just add, it's Brian Dolan, Assistant City Manager, just to reemphasize that last point that Megan made. If you have an adopted climate action plan, it makes the CEQA process for every development project that comes through so much easier. Because if you don't have it and you evaluate each project on its own, you know, it's a whole nother level of analysis for sometimes very small projects. Whereas if you have a certified cap, all you have to do is evaluate it for compliance with the cap, and that's a much easier, far less time-consuming process than going through an individual greenhouse gas analysis for that project. And that is one of the primary benefits of getting it done. And, you know, our current one is theoretically expired. If you look at the Costco project, this is an area, you know, greenhouse gas and air quality and that sort of basket of issues. That's where what they went after, because it's an easy target. And so this will be very helpful.
That's a great point, Brian.
And I just sent the email to you, Steve, with the memo, and attachment 1 of that email, maybe you can forward it to the group, but attachment 1 is that list of actions. But as I mentioned, I did want to just remind you, it is a big list. So if you want to look through that whole list, that's attachment 1, but the shorter list is just included in the memo in the first couple pages. And then I hope that you received it, but let me know if you did not.
I did. I got it. Thank you. I just said thank you. So yeah, I'll forward that out to everybody, that even those that weren't on this call, so they'll get it.
Hey, Megan, Ellen brought up a good point about a cost benefit analysis. Is that, and that's going to be coming later? I mean, especially for the business community. I mean, the incentive-based regulation versus punitive-based regulations, I think those are important, especially in the business community. But is that going to be on that list?
That's forthcoming. So to do a cost benefit analysis on a 200 action list would be pretty costly and not enough benefit. No. So we are going to do it, but on the shorter list. So once we sort of narrow down what are the actions that actually make sense, then we'll run it, and it'll probably be on about 50 actions rather than 200.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that a lot of those actions will be business focused, probably, because they're the ones that'll be looking at it closest from their effect.
They will. So any of the ones that are listed as high priority in the list are currently being considered. So I did include a couple low priority on your list of top 10 just to see if they were something that was of interest. And if they were, then to flag that, and we can include it in the next round. So yeah, any of the high priority actions.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
Megan, this is Steve. Thank you again for joining us. In our focus group, we talked, at least I talked about our competitiveness to the other cities in the Tri-Valley, even though we're friends and we work together on things. And I think Dublin, the city of Dublin just confirmed their cap based on the newsletter I just got in the mail at my house. So are we looking at that just to see where things true up to that and make sure that we're not like going to be way on one side or the other?
Yeah, we are. That's been an important part of our process. I mean, we are obviously unique and have unique opportunities and such here in town, but that has been an important part of the process. So Zach, he's on the call, but he's been organizing a monthly call with a bunch of other Bay Area jurisdictions that are currently updating their climate action plans. So we've been in conversation with a lot of other cities, including Dublin and Livermore monthly. And then as part of our review of what actions to consider, we looked specifically at Dublin's plan because they just adopted it. And so it's pretty relevant to the technology and the legislation and proximity to us. So we looked at all of their actions, and actually a number of them are reflected in our current list. And so they're doing things, for example, like a REACH code for new construction, among other actions. And then our targets that we so far have set are aligned with the Dublin target, and they're also the draft targets in Livermore's plan. So we're all kind of, you know, on the same path of reduction and probably having to do a lot of the same actions to get there.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I'm glad you're doing that.
Great. Any, oh yeah, go Peter.
So Megan, is this being generated from within the planning department, or do you have consultants that are pulling out their elastic plastic climate action plan to follow?
Staff-led, we do have a consultant team that's helping us with a lot of the technical work. So for example, doing the GHG inventory and analysis is using modeling and tools beyond staff's capabilities. So we don't have those tools in-house. So we do have a consultant team, and they are helping with a lot of the technical as well as doing some of that background research. But it's really trued up against, you know, what can we do here in Pleasanton? It's looking at our documents, it's talking to our staff, and talking to groups like this. So.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I learned from my good friend Bill Wheeler back when we were talking about the Johnson Drive and how sitting at a stoplight for 7 seconds versus 5 seconds changes the gas and his efficiencies and all that. I remember you talking about that, Billy. But is that's all part of this, is looking at stoplight timing and Santa Rita Drive and all that?
So there are a couple actions that talk to vehicle idling, both on-road and off-road. So off-road would be like construction equipment. Idling does have a emissions factor associated with it. I don't know that they're going to quite be in the high priority category, just if you look at anticipated effectiveness of an action like that and cost. But if it is something that you would like elevated, that would be something to flag now. We can include it in the quantitative analysis.
Yeah, Brock?
Yeah, on that note, I'm assuming that the plan takes into account the conversion to electric vehicles going forward, right? So all those traffic lights, you know, no longer have a footprint at some point.
Does, and one of our strategies within the transportation section is to encourage as much decarbonization, so as much going to electric vehicles as possible. So by putting together an electric vehicle charging plan where we install more chargers throughout the city at strategic locations, you know, and things like that.
Great. Any, I'm sure Chevron will have some opinions on all this. Nathan?
Hey, we believe in all forms of energy. So, you know, we're supportive of these plans. We know the, you know, for our core business, you know, there's a good demand for it still globally. So we're just monitoring these and continuing to evolve our own business strategy as well. So yeah, we have a, you know, as Megan mentioned, you know, the charging, you know, electric vehicles, that's thing that we're testing and piloting and investing in at some of our stations. So you might pull into a Chevron station and actually see, you know, Tesla's being charged over on the side, because as it takes 45 minutes to charge, you know, they can go in and get some, you know, extra mile convenience items. So yeah, we're continuing to monitor all these local action plans very closely.
Yeah. Bill Wheeler, I'm sure you're monitoring some of those too in the transportation world. You're on mute.
I'm trying to stay out of this conversation best I can. It's really, you know, it is the idling cars that sit in Costco's lines that concern some of us. I'm not involved in that program, but it's just generally you see it. The cars sit there and idle for extended lengths of time. That was one of our issues, is just for health of our own employees and that kind of stuff. But you know, apparently they're getting mitigated, and San Ramon seems to be okay with it. And you know, we love Chevron and we love that fuel. We're still operating. Now we're looking at electric pieces. Our issue is generally the amount of runtime that we can get on a charge, and as those increase, those times increase, it makes it more feasible to look at those as alternatives for us. It would be a huge reductions in emissions in what we produce. But also our little city planned Pleasanton rides could be a real easy kind of automatic kind of go to electric pretty quick, because we have access and we're local and we don't really do any extended trips and we're in the market. So we're looking at that too, just for the city.
Great feedback. Thanks. Any other comments, questions? Got all the high-powered city of Pleasanton people on this line. And that includes you, Brian.
Hey, Herb.
My old planning friend.
Herb, can I get one more in there?
Sure, Dave, always for you, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I apologize for kind of going to the trough a few times on this. Megan and the city team, would you be willing to come back to this group after the measures have been released and we've had an opportunity to read them? Because there's a synergy happening in this conversation among the business holders, because unfortunately sometimes we get a little siloed, especially during COVID. We don't have the opportunities to have those conversations over coffee. I mean, clearly representing homeowners and the economics of some of these cap things, like to get our perspective out there. But the conversation that, you know, I would love to hear the comments from the rest of the business community in an open forum like this. So long question that's requiring a short answer. Hopefully your answer would be yes. I'd love to come back to this group.
Come back to this group. Are you thinking like in this part of the process, or sort of after the list is narrowed down?
In this part of the process, because again, I think there's a lot of opportunities for synergies among the various stakeholders, perhaps even some business opportunities as well. So, and Steve, not to throw a bunch of work on your plate, but maybe if we even had a special meeting outside of the monthly schedule to deal exclusively with this issue, maybe in a couple weeks, when we've had a chance to read through the measures and then reconvene specifically on this.
Megan, it's Brian. I was actually just writing an email to you and Helen saying that we should offer that, because I think, you know, the meat of the input is after you see the specifics as written. And if for nothing else, to answer more detailed questions on those things. I doubt very much that our schedule would allow us to attend one of these regular scheduled meetings. I think it would have to be kind of a special call, but I think that's something that we can do and should do.
Yeah, and maybe we can, we have a number of outreach meetings through this month, so it's just going to have to be looking at kind of that schedule. Maybe Steve, offline, we can talk about a potential time or times that would work, and you can work with your group to see if we can find a date.
Yeah, not a problem. We'll chat after this and try to schedule something. And then I can let everybody know when I send out the memo that we've scheduled this next meeting for feedback. So it's in that, so they know there's a deadline.
Let's make sure we have James Paxton with Hacienda and part of it. He'd be some great feedback on it.
Yeah, he's part of the focus group too, Herb,
okay.
And has been involved. So, but yeah, it definitely would like to get his input.
I got one question for Pam. As you're going talking to the business communities out there, or the businesses looking to come to Pleasanton, where does climate action plan incentive or disincentive come up with your discussions?
Herb, it's generally not part of our initial conversations, okay. Right? That comes later when they've decided that Pleasanton is the location, and we start to get more specific about where they want to locate or what they want to do to build out their campus. And so that's where that comes in. More lately, though, a lot of our larger companies, particularly, but even the medium to smaller size companies are interested in these initiatives, so they like to talk about them. Certainly, you know, we've leaned on LEAD a lot over the years, but I think that having a plan that says this is what we're all about isn't going to be a hindrance if we get the details right.
Yeah. No, as being 32 years of Schneider Electric in the building management system industry, I know that was getting really hot in the last 5 years, and microgrids and all those kind of things. So, any other questions? Oh, yep, Steve.
Hi, Pam, are we going to be reviewing this at the Economic Vitality Committee? And if so, when is that scheduled? Because that could potentially be an opportunity for some people to join us as well.
Yeah, we are, Steve, and it's at our next meeting later in March. So it's next week.
Yeah, the 18th.
That would be the 18th, I think.
18th, yeah.
Yeah, great. So that's on the agenda.
Okay.
And I will add that we plan to get into the actions at that meeting. We're providing you a staff report ahead of time, and we do plan to talk about the actions at that meeting. So you will have that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. That agenda report will go out tomorrow or Friday at the latest.
Okay. It's a 7:30 meeting, so yeah.
Awesome. Any more, or do you want to update us on the new non-lockdown rules, Brian? Pleasanton, while we got some business.
The red tier
rules.
Yeah.
I think as it relates to businesses, Pam's your gal.
Okay. All right, Pam.
Yeah. So if anybody missed that announcement yesterday, let me just tell you, we moved into the red tier. Yesterday, Alameda County said starting today, we can follow the red tier guidance. And really what that means for our business community are a few key things. Restaurants can now open indoors at 25% capacity or a maximum of 100 people. Gyms can start to operate indoors at 10% capacity. Retail moves from 25% to 50% capacity indoors, and shopping malls can start to open their indoor dining with some modifications. At the same time, grocery stores that were allowed to be open at 50% can now be open at 100% capacity, and a few other things that may be less impactful to Pleasanton. Movie theaters can open at some reduced limited capacity, and then our very own Museum on Main can now open indoors at 25% capacity. So that's sort of the high level stuff. There's a lot of other activity happening, especially on the school side and on the organized sports side, you know, particularly for competitions. So what you're just starting to see is that, you know, those allowances get a little less restrictive over time, and we're happy to see that. And I know our businesses are as well.
And we're still allowing the outside dining on the parklets.
We are.
That's
we
good.
are, and we're talking to PDA right now about what their recommendation is for the return of Weekend on Main. So I feel really confident that will come back. We just need to talk with them about what their recommended timeline is and if there's any tweaking to be done, because you guys will appreciate, as great as it was for restaurants and some other businesses, there were some folks that didn't love it so much right in the downtown, because it really impacted people's ability to park near the business or whatever their concern was. So PDA is working through that with their membership right now.
Mm-hmm. Interesting conversation I had with one of the retailers. They said our target market changed on the weekend. It was the younger crowd coming into the retail shops, and on the midweek it was the more senior crowd where they could drive up and park. And I thought it was interesting how they changed their focus.
And if that means they're getting business throughout the arc of the week and they're hitting both of those demographics, then that is not entirely a bad thing. Yeah. Right? We just need to massage and figure out how it doesn't bring negative impacts to.
Right. They were talking about it. They were upset at first, then they realized it was a different way to go to business. So yeah,
they just sometimes you have to think a little differently.
Yep.
Pam, how long will they allow the tents and the shantytown downtown look to continue?
Like, don't even ask Nelson.
Will they wait until there's more relief, or that we're in another tier, or will they allow it to continue until that?
Yeah, don't even ask Nelson how that looks, Bill. He is just, beside himself when he drives downtown, but it's for the right reason, right? To make sure that we can get our businesses back up.
We support it. We just like to see it change.
Yeah, my guess sitting here today, Bill, is you will see those outdoor those downtown pop-ups allowed, likely through the summer, through the street closure, right? Because that gives them the ability to offer that expanded seating during the week when the street isn't closed. There is no date certain. We've talked internally, is that 75% capacity? Is that 100% capacity? Little hard to know while we were hanging out in purple for so long. Now that we're in red, and I would imagine progressing into orange and yellow, hopefully faster than we went from purple to red, right? We're looking for additional guidance from the state about what happens after yellow. And so my sense right now is it will stay. Those pop-ups will stay, at least in the near term, and we'll figure out how to elegantly blend them with the weekend street closures. But I told one of our downtown restaurants yesterday, my spidey sense tells me that when those weekend street closures are done, we're ripping off the Band-Aid, and those temporary pop-ups need to go away. And we need to get back to something that either feels more intentional and permit, if that's the direction that the city and the downtown wants to go, or they've served their purpose for whatever they needed to do during COVID. So TBD a little bit, but that's where we're thinking.
Great. Awesome little mini discussion there, Steve. If there's no other questions, Steve, anything else?
Just to let everybody know, if you want to hear from our health director for the county, Dr. Moss, he'll be speaking to the chambers, Tri-Valley Chambers, on Friday at 9:30. You can register through our website. That's on our event calendar. So I think that would be interesting, maybe get his take on the next tier, excuse me, that we hopefully will be going to in the near future. So anyway, that's the next thing that I think would be very interesting to our business community.
Awesome. Thank you all. See you tonight, Planning Commission.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Megan. Thanks for being here.
Great presentation.
Yep.